You know that feeling? You sit down to read a book, and within maybe 4 minutes, your brain gets this physical, almost painful itch.
Oh, yeah. And you just reach right for your phone.
Exactly. You reach for the phone. And we are always taught to call that a lack of discipline. We frame it as this, like, character flaw or a personal failing where you simply just don't have the willpower to focus on the text in front of you.
Right. Like you're just not trying hard enough.
Yeah, exactly. But modern neurobiology has a very, very different way of describing that itch. Like, what if feeling utterly drained and unmotivated after an hour of scrolling isn't a lack of willpower at all?
It really isn't.
What if it's a literal physical neurochemical hijacking?
See, framing it as a biological override,
Yeah.
I mean, that completely changes the conversation. When you actually look at the mechanics of what is happening in the brain, relying on willpower in that scenario is, well, it's essentially bringing a knife to a pharmacological gunfight.
Wow. Okay, welcome to today's deep dive. I am so glad you're joining us because today we are absolutely tearing up the script on how we think about our screens.
It's a big one today.
It really is. So our source materials today comes from this fascinating Substack newsletter called SpiralSeekr. And this author, they focus on this really cool intersection of technology, biology, and philosophy.
Yeah, their stuff is incredibly cross-disciplinary.
It's wild. Like, just to give you an idea of how varied this newsletter is, they have other recent essays on, like, how crying literally physically evacuates stress chemicals from your body.
Which is mind-blowing on its own.
Right. And they did one on the complete lack of science behind the blood type diet and another on Stendhal syndrome, which is where intense beauty causes acute psychosomatic distress.
Basically getting physically sick because art is too pretty.
Yeah, it's so interesting. But our specific mission today is to dive into one of their most provocative essays. It's titled The Dopaminergic Exhaustion of Hypernovelty.
Quite a mouthful, but very accurate.
Yeah, very academic title. But the goal is to understand how the algorithms on our phones are quite literally changing the physical shape of our brains. And, what that ultimately means for our basic, fundamental human motivation. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
To really understand how the phone affects the brain, we first have to understand the brain's baseline machinery. But rather than just throwing around the phrase it releases dopamine, we really need to look at what is actually being hijacked here.
Right, because modern psychiatry and neurobiology, they point to a very specific neural architecture when we talk about motivation. It's called the Mesolimbic Pathway.
Okay, the Mesolimbic Pathway.
Yeah. Basically, this is a dopaminergic circuit, and it extends from a region deep, deep in the brain called the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA, all the way up to the nucleus accumbens.
Okay, I am trying to visualize that, and it sounds like a very localized sort of neural superhighway. But what is the actual function of the traffic on that highway? Like, what does it do for us?
Well, the ultimate function is survival, and it's driven by a mechanism called reward prediction error.
Reward prediction error.
Exactly. So the Mesolimbic pathway dictates your behavioral priorities by assigning value to the outside world. But the error part of reward prediction error is the crucial mechanism here.
How so?
Well, people think dopamine is just the pleasure chemical, right? But it's not just about experiencing pleasure. It is a learning and craving molecule.
Right.
When you expect a reward and you get it, sure, you get a baseline amount of dopamine.
Okay, that makes sense.
But when you encounter a reward that is unexpected or, far greater than you anticipated, the brain registers a positive prediction error.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It unleashes this massive spike of dopamine to basically say to the rest of the brain, hey, pay attention to what you just did, remember exactly how you did it, and do it again.
Oh, wow. So the dopamine spike is actually like a biological highlighter pen.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It's marking an unexpected positive event, so we repeat the behavior. I mean, I can totally see how that evolved. Like, if an early human is walking through the woods and unexpectedly finds a massive bush of really high-calorie berries.
Right, a huge survival win.
Yeah, that massive dopamine spike writes the memory of that exact location into their brain. But how does that ancient learning mechanism translate to, a modern digital feed?
Think about the slot machine effect. When you swipe on an algorithmic feed, you honestly don't know what's coming next.
Right. It's a mystery box every time.
Exactly. It might be boring, it might be an ad, or it might be the funniest video you have seen all week. And that sheer unpredictability guarantees constant, massive, positive reward prediction errors.
Because you never know when the jackpot is hitting.
Right. Your brain is constantly surprised by these high-value, hypernovel stimuli. It triggers rapid-fire dopamine spikes that ancient humans might have experienced, like maybe once a month,
And you're getting it every 3 seconds.
every single swipe.
Man. And this brings us to the core argument of the SpiralSeekr essay, which, I gotta say, it really doesn't mince words. The author argues that it actually borders on scientific negligence to classify platforms like TikTok or Instagram Reels or any perfectly tuned algorithmic feed merely as software.
Yeah, they go hard on this point. The author insists that from a strictly pharmacological perspective, these platforms should be classified as high-potency, low-friction behavioral stimulants.
Okay, I actually have to stop you there and push back a little on that.
Sure, go ahead.
Because calling a social media app a pharmacological stimulant or comparing it to heavy drugs, I mean, it feels a little bit like a massive overstatement just to get clicks,
That's
right?
the easy way you'd say that.
Because the source explicitly compares a perfectly tuned feed to cocaine, and cocaine is a Schedule II narcotic. If Instagram is literally cocaine, why aren't people having severe physical withdrawals, like sweating, shaking, or going into actual medical distress when they delete the app?
That is such a fair pushback, and it's a critical distinction we have to make. The difference here lies between systemic autonomic hijacking and targeted mesolimbic hijacking.
Okay, break that down for me.
So cocaine enters the bloodstream, right? It crosses the blood-brain barrier and affects systems across your entire brain and your entire body, which is exactly why you see systemic physical withdrawal symptoms like the sweating and the cardiovascular stress you mentioned.
Right, it's a full-body event.
Exactly. But the algorithm doesn't do that. What the algorithm does is surgically target the exact same localized neurochemical mechanism, but only in the reward center.
Oh. So it is pulling the exact same specific lever in the brain, just without the full body chemical spill.
Yes. And what's fascinating here is how effectively it pulls that lever. Like, chemically speaking, cocaine acts as a dopamine reuptake inhibitor.
Meaning what, exactly?
Okay, so normally your brain releases dopamine into the synaptic cleft. It binds to a receptor, it does its job, and then the brain recycles it. It clears the drain, so to speak.
It cleans up after itself.
Right. Cocaine blocks that recycling process. It plugs the drain and just floods the synapse. The SpiralSeekr essay argues that an algorithm does the exact same thing experientially.
Experientially, not chemically. Okay, let me see if I can translate this into an analogy that makes sense for me. If the brain is a sink, cocaine works by aggressively plugging the drain so the water overflows.
Yes, perfect.
But the algorithm doesn't plug the drain. Instead, the algorithm uses rapid, unsupervised learning to analyze like your specific dwell times, your hesitations, your micro interactions.
It's watching everything you do.
Right. It learns exactly what niche content triggers you. So the algorithm just turns the faucet on so incredibly fast and so continuously with all these micro novelties that the drain simply cannot keep up. The sink still overflows, creating the exact same localized flooding in the reward center.
That is a brilliant way to picture it, and the unsupervised learning is the real key to that flooding. The algorithm isn't static code, it is programmatic flexibility.
It adapts.
Exactly. It maps these specific visual and semantic triggers that will maximize dopaminergic release in you, the individual user. It is bespoke neurochemistry.
Man, and it delivers that flood with absolutely zero friction. Which is so unnatural, right? Historically, getting a dopamine reward required immense metabolic effort. You had to hunt or forage, build shelter, navigate complex social hierarchies.
It was hard work.
Yeah. The friction was the point. It paced the delivery of dopamine. Like driving a manual transmission car, it takes deliberate effort, shifting gears, pressing the gas to get a reward. But the algorithm is like slapping a rocket booster onto that car. It just floods the engine with fuel without the driver ever touching the pedals. You are sitting completely motionless on a couch, expending 0 calories, while your brain's reward center receives a level of stimulation that used to require, I don't know, climbing a mountain.
And that introduces a catastrophic biological problem. A system that evolved for sparse, hard-earned rewards simply cannot sustain an endless, frictionless flood of hyperstimulation.
Because if you flood an engine with high-octane fuel for too long, the engine overheats, it breaks down. So how does our biological system survive this constant onslaught?
It initiates a defense mechanism, and this is governed by the principle of homeostasis, which is just the body's natural drive to maintain a dynamic equilibrium and prevent systemic burnout.
So it fights back.
Right. When the brain detects chronic excessive stimulation of its D2 dopamine receptors in the nucleus accumbens, it triggers a process called structural downregulation.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Let's unpack structural downregulation because that sounds highly clinical, and I want to make sure we aren't overcomplicating a basic human experience here.
Fair enough.
Isn't this just a very fancy way of saying we are building a tolerance? Like a few years ago, I used to need one single cup of coffee to wake up. Now I need 3 cups just to feel normal. Is the algorithm just giving us a dopamine tolerance, or is this somehow fundamentally different than a caffeine habit or just a passing bad mood?
Well, it is a form of tolerance, absolutely. But the word structural changes the framing completely.
How so?
A passing mood or a mild caffeine habit often relates to the temporary availability of neurotransmitters. But what happens with algorithmic hypernovelty is a phenomenon called structural plasticity. The brain literally rebuilds its architecture to protect itself from excitotoxicity.
Excitotoxicity.
Yeah, that's when a cell is stimulated so much that it actually dies.
Whoa. So to protect itself from literally dying, the brain changes its own geometry.
Literally. The physical geometry of the synapse alters. The D2 dopamine receptors are physical proteins on the surface of the cell. When they are chronically overstimulated by this algorithmic flood, the cell physically pulls them inside.
It pulls them inside.
Yes, the receptors retract beneath the cell membrane or they're dismantled entirely. Basically, the cell removes the keyhole so the excessive dopamine can't force its way in.
That paints such a striking picture at the microscopic level. The cell is barricading the doors just to survive the flood. But if the brain has physically removed those keyholes, what happens to the math of our daily lives?
The math becomes brutal because your new baseline state requires progressively higher levels of extreme high-velocity stimulation just to feel neutral. You aren't chasing a high anymore. You are scrolling furiously just to alleviate the deficit created by your own retracted receptors.
Just to feel okay. And that leads to the inevitable question, what happens when you finally close the app, when the algorithmic faucet shuts off, but your brain has been structurally altered and barricaded against stimulation?
For the end user, this structural downregulation manifests phenomenologically as a severe condition called anhedonia. The SpiralSeekr essay describes it as a terrifying flattening of the emotional landscape.
A severe motivational deficit?
Yes, exactly. Because your tolerance threshold has been artificially spiked by synthetic superstimuli, the normal physical world just no longer registers.
So what does this all mean? Let's apply this to the exact scenario we started with today, sitting down to read a book. The source text points out that low-intensity, high-effort terrestrial tasks like reading or engaging in quiet reflection or pursuing long-term delayed gratification, they're basically rendered pharmacologically obsolete.
Right. Think about the required cognitive effort versus the neurochemical payoff. Reading a book requires immense focus. You're decoding abstract symbols into meaning, and you have to sustain that attention for hours.
It's hard work for the brain.
Very hard work. And the dopamine payoff is subtle and heavily delayed. You might not get it until you finish a chapter or finally grasp a new concept. And the brain is an efficiency machine.
Always looking for the shortcut.
Exactly. When its recalibrated reward calculus compares the grueling effort of reading against the frictionless high-velocity reward of just opening an app, the book simply cannot compete.
To put an image to that recalibrated calculus, it's like trying to sit down and read a book after an hour of endless scrolling is basically like trying to hear someone whisper a secret to you while you are standing in the very front row of a heavy metal concert.
The whisper is drowned out entirely. You can't even tell someone is speaking.
Right. The whisper is the book. It's quiet, it's nuanced, and it requires your full attention. But your brain has physically adapted to survive the heavy metal concert of the algorithm. Your receptors have literally retracted, the music is blaring, your threshold for stimulation is maxed out, and you literally cannot process the whisper. The subtle, delayed rewards of the physical world are obliterated by the lingering deafness of the digital world. What does this mean for us as a species if this happens to everyone?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we arrive at the existential paradigm that the author warns us about. By recognizing algorithmic content feeds as digital analogs to chemical stimulants, we have to face a massive crisis of structural plasticity on a societal level.
Which is terrifying.
It is. We are actively engineering an ecosystem that maximizes short-term neurochemical rewards at the direct expense of our long-term dopaminergic health.
Which implies an incredibly dark trajectory for human progress. Like, the author asks this truly chilling question. When the baseline functionality of human motivation is constantly overridden by synthetic, optimized superstimuli, What remains to propel our cognitive evolution?
Right, because human history is defined by what the essay calls terrestrial ambition.
Terrestrial ambition. I love that
It's
phrase.
a great phrase. It's the drive to build, to discover, to understand, to endure profound hardship for a distant goal. Learning to farm, building the pyramids, going to the moon, all of that relies on a healthy, functioning Mesolimbic pathway that places a really high value on delayed gratification.
But if our societal default becomes a state of chronic, algorithmically induced anhedonia, the biological drive to achieve anything in the physical world just disappears. The effort to reward ratio of the real world can never, ever compete with an unsupervised learning model, perfectly tuned to your specific psychological profile. It's like our capacity for terrestrial ambition is actively being written out of the human psyche.
We are structurally downgrading our own motivation, and the crazy part is we are doing it willingly.
Man. So to you listening right now, let's just trace this entire journey back for a second. We started deep in the brain with the Mesolimbic Pathway and reward prediction error, which is your natural compass for learning and survival. We explored how the frictionless slot machine effect of algorithms exploits that pathway, acting as high-potency behavioral stimulants.
Highly potent.
Yeah. And then we saw how the brain, just trying to survive this endless heavy metal concert of stimulation, physically alters its own architecture, actually retracting your D2 receptors behind the cell membrane. And finally, we saw how that biological defense mechanism leaves you in a state of anhedonia, where the quiet whispers of terrestrial ambition are completely drowned out.
The mechanics really are sobering when you lay them all out like that.
They really are. But honestly, understanding the physical mechanism is also profoundly reassuring to me. Like, the next time you feel a severe motivational deficit or you find yourself staring blankly at a page, feeling that painful itch to grab your phone, do not just blame yourself. Refuse the narrative that you're simply lazy or suffering from a moral failing.
It's not a mortal failing.
It's really not. It might just be your D2 receptors hiding beneath the cell membrane, desperately trying to survive the modern digital ecosystem. But, okay, this does leave me with one massive, lingering question regarding the biology here.
Let's hear it.
If my brain physically remodeled itself to hide these receptors, am I permanently broken? Like, can the house be unremodeled? Because neuroplasticity works both ways, doesn't it?
It absolutely works both ways, and that is the critical scientific hope here. The architecture is not permanently frozen.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, if you remove the hyperstimulation, what is popularly called a dopamine detox, the brain will eventually recognize that the floodwaters have receded. However, because we are talking about physical proteins migrating back to the surface of the cell, it is not an overnight fix.
So just closing the app for an hour won't cure the anhedonia?
No, definitely not. Clinical literature suggests that for D2 receptors to significantly upregulate and migrate back to the cell surface, it requires a sustained reduction in hyperstimulation. It often takes anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks.
Wow. Almost a month.
Yeah. You have to endure the anhedonia for nearly a month before the whisper of the physical world starts to sound loud again.
Enduring a month of motivational deficit sounds really daunting. But I guess knowing there is a physical timeline for those receptors to resurface, it makes it actionable. It's not a permanent state.
It does, and leads directly into the final, highly provocative thought the author leaves us with.
Oh, I loved this part.
Right. So we have established that these algorithms use rapid, unsupervised learning to perfectly adapt to our neurochemistry and cause this structural downregulation. Well, what would happen if we utilized that exact same machine learning technology, but inverted the goal?
Wait, like engineering an algorithm to fight the damage caused by the algorithm?
Exactly. Could we theoretically build a digital feed designed specifically as algorithmic rehab?
Algorithmic rehab, that is wild.
Imagine an unsupervised learning model that doesn't seek to maximize dopamine release or increase your dwell time. Instead, it's trained to slowly, almost imperceptibly, lower your stimulation threshold over time.
Oh, wow. So instead of suddenly going cold turkey, deleting everything, and facing a month of grueling anhedonia, the algorithm just slowly dims the lights on the heavy metal concert.
Precisely. It would gradually reintroduce friction. It would gently decrease the frequency of those positive reward prediction errors, slowly coaxing those D2 receptors back out from beneath the cell membrane.
That's genius.
It could theoretically restore our baseline and rescue our terrestrial ambition without the user ever experiencing the painful shock of a sudden dopamine deficit.
Algorithmic rehab. Using the very engine that hijacked us to quietly drive us back home, that is an incredibly powerful concept to leave off on. I mean, we have moved from believing our scrolling was just a lack of discipline to realizing it is a profound neurochemical hijacking, to imagining a future where technology might actually be leveraged to heal the very neural pathways it broke. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of your own motivation. Take care of your D2 receptors out there, and we will catch you next time.